Are we ready to start?
Do you know how long you want us to go about?
No, I just figured we'd go, and if it's all right, we'll stop. Yeah. 2 minutes to the 0 hour.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started here. I would like to thank you all for coming to DCAC, to my artist talk for January 15, October 16. I'd like to begin by thanking DCAC itself, the director, B. Stanley, Mike and Phil, who came and made the selection for the show, and for also the opportunity to do something akin to a retrospective with new work. To begin, I'll just talk a little bit about the components to the show. These 4 pieces are an installation called Toxicity in the Air, and it's a work that came about because I was invited to participate in a group exhibition about the environment. I remembered some pages that I'd made many years ago, handmade paper, that I thought would lend themselves to the idea of being clouds and air. And that's actually where the work started with this piece here, which is called The Toxic Air We Unknowingly Breathe. In making more panels for that, I decided to clear out my stash of dryer lint to make paper, because it was about using things that were already in existence and that could be recycled. So, you know, the whole idea is not creating more in terms of your carbon footprint. So by using things that we have and recycling, we further our purpose. So this work came from the lint panels, and there's no added color. Basically, they are the lint as it comes off my dryer screen, suspended in an acrylic medium. And the idea being that this is the stuff that washes out of our clothes as we walk out in this really filthy, nasty air. And so this is the remnant. And this piece is called, what is it? The Red Menace. I had to think about it. And it was basically experimental because I wanted to do something other than talk about the naturalness of the paper as it came from the screen. And it was the first one. I was unenthusiastic about it because I thought that it made it really hard. And I guess as a toxic element, it is something hard and corrosive, and in the end I ended up liking it. So. But the final piece in the series is the one on this wall, which is called Industrial Smog. And those pieces were really the most difficult because I wanted to maintain the beauty of the paper without giving them too much intervention from me and, you know, forcing my ideas on the paper, because I think that the paper can speak for itself given an idea. So that the idea was to maintain the beauty without adding too much at the same time to make it art, okay? Now, the other pieces are studio exercises. The series along this wall, they're called 3-sided. And whenever I'm in the studio, if I'm not working on a project, then I have exercises that I execute. And coming off of my public art project, which was about triangles, there are 2 pieces on St. Elizabeth's campus in Southeast that rely on the triangle as a shape. So I decided to see how that triangle could translate into my studio work. And we started with the far piece, which is called The Chase. And so we started working from there. Next, water meditation, which is a kind of toy. A lot of people want to think it refers to clean water, but it's actually a water meditation that you actually play with. You manipulate each of the little panels, and the more you play with it, it calms you down. It's like looking at the ocean, you know, the waves. The other 2 pieces are just exercises, you know, color, shape, and trying to understand how the triangle can work in space. The green pieces go back to something I do all the time, line studies, creating an environment where there's a specific line that you look at in and out of itself. The next pieces are suspended animation, and these 3 cubes are together so that whenever you move it, the animation is suspended when it stops because they're connected together. When you move one, you move them all. The final piece is called The Elite Guard, and it is the third in a three-part series called The Black Army. The other pieces in the series are actually on display right now at the African American Prince George's County Museum, which opened this past Friday. I would encourage you all to go out there because the dates of this show, January 15th through October 16th, are the dates of execution for all of this work, including the work that's out in PG County. There's also a work out there that is on quilt batting, which is actually how I started out in January 2015. So it kind of go full circle. I would also like to point out that this is the body of work that I submitted to the DC Commission, which they saw fit to give me a small fellowship for. So it's award-winning work. Well, yeah, and it was like a long road to get that fellowship. Because it's not always easy, and it changes year after year, and you keep trying and finally you get one. So let's see. Then I have, the retrospective aspect of the show is actually in my pop-up patrons boutique, which is actually in the very corner back there. And it is retrospective in that there are some small miniature collages that have paper that come from my days at the Eastern Market. Okay, so that's like where I kind of started out everything, and it just kind of neatly ties everything up together. There's a catalog that was produced again with funds from the DC Commission in 2004, a catalog that shows older work, and then there's a small print. The pop-up boutique exists to help me make new work. And right now, what I'm trying to fund is a residency that I have in Kentucky in March, so, okay, FYI. Okay, so then I'll read the rest of what I have here, which is kind of like an artist statement. I make work to strengthen the artist's relationship with the public at large and to challenge how fine art is defined. My studio ambition is to integrate image, object, and frame using abstraction to make pictures or settings that read as something familiar. My intent is to articulate issues of contemporary culture and art through installation of similar objects that embody social or aesthetic ideas. Abstraction from a writer's point of view, meaning using a shared language like French or Spanish or Zulu. The more people that understand the language, the more effectively you can communicate. Abstraction is a mind game. Literal versus illusion versus illusion. Competition. Being independent in the art world. At the top of one's game. Necessity. Like an emergency. Out of the box. On the fringes. Okay? Now I would like to introduce my guest. My guest is Ellen Weiss, whom I've known for years and years and years. And I invited Ellen to talk with me today because we're talking about being independent in the art world here in Washington. And I think it's a timely subject, and I think it's something that would make for interesting conversation. So.
Thank you. Well, as you said to me when we first discussed this, we've both been around forever. Yikes. And I have followed your work for about 20 years. And our interests often coincide, and I love to see how you treat them as opposed to how I do. So thank you for inviting me to participate with you. I love this show. I think it's beautiful and it's powerful, and it engages with the critical issue of are we going to survive on this planet, or are we just all going to go up in literal smoke, which is what this all reminds me of. I have some questions just to get this going, and then we'll open it to the audience.
Okay.
You have a really interesting history. At UVA, you studied philosophy and Afro-American studies, and when you came to DC, you were a poet. And for quite some number of years, you were a very successful poet in DC. and somehow you transitioned, you're making visual art. And if you don't mind, I'd like to hear a little bit of why that transition and how that transition took place.
Okay, when I was writing, I was always reading, and at UVA, one of the things that I discovered I liked was researching. So I was always researching, and I was doing research on the nature of language and writing and the power of words. And I was an artist model. So I worked at the Corcoran and different places around town, and I was seeing people manipulating material and whatnot. And you know, I wrote on blank pages, and I'd find myself making little doodles and things like that. And you know, it just went from there. I decided at one point in my research that poetry was the original abstraction, okay, and that abstract art was actually poetry. And I started playing around with what I perceive as language in abstract art that evolved from modernism all the way up through all the different movements. It gives us ways to talk about and or techniques to use to create things to talk about what our world has become. So for me, that's what abstraction is, and why I think it's a mind game. So once I understood that painting is actually a language, then it was a natural thing for me to try to write with color and line and shape. And the other thing that really happened is I moved to France, where I can speak French, but it's not the same as writing in English, you know, so that to communicate more and more, I began to get more and more visual. So when I came back to the States, I was really visual.
You like to use the term blackstraction.
Mm-hmm.
Would you explain what you mean by that?
Okay, glad you asked. Well, blackstraction is a term that I came up with to describe my work and the work of other artists that are making paintings three-dimensionally. I call it the objectification of painting, where there are craft techniques that might be employed, such as stitching or weaving or, you know, putting hinges, anything that gives the work a three-dimensionality. Sometimes it's a relief, but it's the whole idea of a painting not being a static two-dimensional form. And I call it blackstraction because I think that a lot of the language that was developed around the idea of three-dimensionality in painting came from African American artists and from Asian artists, and I wanted to do something that would refer to the roots of the word as I saw it, or the techniques as I saw it.
I didn't know this, and when I did a little research for this talk, I learned that you studied in Japan.
Yes.
Which is interesting. Maybe you could tell us all what you learned there and why you went there.
Well, I went to Japan in 1999 because I had decided that by the year 2000 I wanted to visit more than half the continents, and so I hadn't been to Asia, so I decided I would go to Japan. And I started because I loved Japanese art and I wanted to get a first-hand experience. And I started looking for an artist residency there, and I met a gentleman actually at the Japanese Information and Cultural Center who said, you can come and study with me. So I just made that happen. You know, it was summer, and he's a really well-known Sumi ink painter in Japan. So I went and I studied with him, and it was a very interesting experience because traveling as a woman in Japan, which is a really patriarchal society, it was a fascinating experience because, you know, here I am, I'm totally grown, but I can't do anything on my own because I'm female. You know, it's like whenever I wanted to do something, I had to have somebody go with me, and, you know, it was interesting. I did learn, what do you call it, hiragana, the writing that women do. They used it to write, in ancient times they used it to write poetry, and it was actually a language that they actually developed. But I hardly remember it now, but that's what I studied. And
do you use any of those techniques in your work now, the Sumi techniques?
Well, yes, because the Sumi ink is something that's kind of unforgivable. You have to be fast, and you know, you have to be sure, and you have to have confidence in the way that you're painting, because if you're making the letter, then you want everything to go into the letter, the feeling that it comes is the strength of the work. So that's what we wanted to do, and I think that even now when I'm working fast and I'm working on things that are more pictorial, I use that as a way of painting and making the statement so that it's a strong statement from the start.
I wanted to talk a little bit about what it's like to work here. Like you and I both work here. I don't know what it's like to work in other cities because I never have. But we exist in a certain ecosystem here in Washington, D.C., an artist ecosystem. And it forces many of us to, for better or worse, to make our own way, to make our own opportunities, to make our own exhibitions, and to not wait around for somebody to invite us. And you've done that too. So talk a little bit about what it's like to be in the Washington, D.C. ecosystem.
Well, to be in the Washington ecosystem is it's what you make of it yourself. And I think that it's something that will become more and more true for artists everywhere, because I think that the formal art world is a very closed system, and I think that unless you really have an end to that, then you're going to be working on your own. I mean, I think that the reference I made to being out the cube or on the fringes, it's fine to exist on the fringes as far as I'm concerned, because it allows me to do this. It allows me to make the work I want to make, and it doesn't place me in any kind of a pigeonhole about the work that I can make in the future because I've made this work in the past. It's the way that I see my own evolution as an artist, and it allows me to stay true to the things that are important to me as an artist, basically, which is understanding what abstraction is and however way I choose to go about that. I'm always pushing myself to see things I haven't seen, which is why I come in and go from materials like this exhibition is the first time I've used handmade paper in a number of years. And it's also one of the more recent times that I've actually made work that had illusions in reality as opposed to being about the work itself. My last series was called Volume, and they were a series actually made from the pH neutral paper that I've used to work on those three-sided pieces, but I cut into them and they draped on the wall, actually embodying the idea of volume, so that they were actually what the subject of the work was. Okay, so they embodied volume, and that's all they were, was volume. But these pieces, I think, have meaning outside of the material, and that's what I think is important about it, is that as an independent artist, I'm able to make those decisions that I can make work that is purely art and aesthetic, or I can make something that has social meaning.
And also, if you made that work for a gallery, they would say, how the hell can we sell that? And it would be really hard to get that shown in a commercial gallery. It's one of the advantages of being able to show at a place like DCAC.
Well, yes, because I think too that unless you're really at the top of the art world, you can't produce pieces that are in a way frivolous like this. You know, because there is no ready market for it. You know, there is no place, I mean, you know, they're going to be stored at my studio when I take them down. You know, and unless I have another occasion to show them, they will stay stored. You know, because just in terms of my own network, who do I know that will buy that and put it on their wall? Or even something like this, which I love, you know, but at the same time, it's just because I wanted to, you know. And for me, that's what being an artist is, and being an artist in the public. Having people who understand what your work is about, and understanding that as an artist, you are their spokesperson. And if you find somebody that speaks the language that you speak, then that's a good thing.
That's the reward. Well, to me, this is clearly environmental work, but it's very unusual environmental work because I have a friend who's a scientist, and she does this little experiment with audiences when she gives talks about global warming, which she does a lot. And she asks people to close their eyes and imagine what image is triggered in your mind by the word environment. So do that for me. Close your eyes, everybody. Get an image in your mind that is triggered by the word environment. Keep it in your mind, don't lose it. Now I'm going to ask you some questions. Keep your eyes closed and raise your hands in response. How many of you have water in your image? How many of you have greenery in your image? How many of you have a person in your image? Oh, that's more than we usually get. Okay. The point of the exercise being that when we think of the environment, we think of some pristine, beautiful landscape, and hardly anybody ever puts a human being in their image of the environment. But this work is environmental work centered around the urban dweller, which makes it really unusual and, to my mind, fabulous. So, is that how you see it? And why is it that the urban environment is of interest to you?
Because that's my environment.
Yes.
You know, and the whole idea for pollution to me is from the industrial world, is from the cities, from the way that we currently live. And there's a lot of irony in the way that I work and a lot of humor, okay, because I think that we have to laugh at ourselves, and I think we also have to recognize that we're doing this to ourselves in a certain kind of way, and that we're unconscious of it. And for me to create this kind of work in relationship to the environment is, I want you to go up to it and I want you, oh, this is just gorgeous, you know, just love this. And then you say, oh, it's about air pollution. You'll never forget it. You know, it's the idea of being able to give you the idea without the scientific fact, you know, that makes it really come home that this is what is going on in the environment, because we're so inundated with the facts, you know, and we know it, and so now it's kind of like in one ear and out the other. And if you see something that's not really that, but it is, and this is the image that you'll think of, but you will never forget that it's about the environment also, you know. And that's what I wanted to do, was to bring you to a place where it would really hit home, but at the same time, not in a way that you could easily dismiss it.
I'm going to ask one more question and then we'll throw it open to the audience. And for me, the final question is, your work has covered, you use lots of different media. You are in every possible dimension, 1, 2, 3, and more. And your subject matter changes. And I'm curious, I mean, I had not seen the big sculptures down at St. Elizabeth's. I don't know if you've done public art before, but it's for me a huge, wow, departure. What's next in the Sheila Kreider of?
What's next in the Sheila Kreider of? Well, we're working on, the big we, right? Like I got some studio minions, you know. No, what I'm working on are a series of pieces that are going to, again, be on quilt batting. You don't have an example of that piece, but it is available for viewing at the Prince George's County African American Museum in North Brentwood, right off Raleigh Avenue, right across the line. But the idea for that work is kind of minimalist in a way. It's about color, and it's going to be about texture, but not, well, texture in this kind of a way, but it's about how the quilt batting absorbs. And I don't know what the subject is going to be because I haven't started working on it yet. And to me, the subject of all my work is abstraction. Okay, it's about being able to articulate in a way that communicates to you. That's why I say that abstraction is a mind game, and it's always being led by the materials to create something.
Yeah, materials, materials first. I know that's, for me, that's true too.
And the articulation of an idea comes afterwards. It's funny that people don't always understand when I say abstraction is the subject, because they see abstraction as being like this big umbrella thing, but it is a big umbrella thing. And it allows me to be articulate as an artist, okay, doing multiple, what do I say, doing what seemingly are unrelated things when in my mind everything is related. And it's how I'm able to tie the things together and to create the objects that makes for a successful experiment or not. Because if the object is not successful, then I need to do more work, okay, to pull in all the elements of abstraction that I know will communicate the idea that I'm carrying. So
let's open it. Would you raise your hand if you have any questions? Yes. You. No, Elizabeth, you can go. No, you can go. In front.
Okay. Well, I think that, that part of the subject, being inspired by pollution, it always seems that there's always been, this interplay with pollution, whether when you think of, it's the redemptive power of working. It's sort of, to me, that seems like one of the subjects. So if you think of water and,
it's like it's been through a lot and still you have all this sediment.
This is clean.
And this is clean. Exactly. So.
Anybody?
Oh, I was also going to say something about the nature of contemporary art and, the whole idea of creating work around a subject. And, toxicity in the air is a work that is contemporary in its outlook and its point of view. And, it could have a couple of performances, and the performances would be something like me, well, for everybody that comes up at the bottom of the stairs, I'm standing out there and I'm passing out masks, okay? That's a performance. Another performance could be standing up here with a mask on, reading air pollution statistics, okay? These are contemporary ideas in art. And as somebody who works independently and who chooses not to do that kind of a performance, then we also have to make sure that as artists, and the reason we're here is to document, okay? The idea of documentation is very important. This is where we are right now in our work. This is what we think about our work. This is how people talk about the work. So I think it's very important to have conversations about what we're doing and where our work might go and how we see ourselves fitting into the big scheme of things. Because I don't think that as artists we are in competition with each other. I think that the only competition I have is me and where I want to push myself to go in terms of how articulate I can become as an artist. So
I think, and I've heard this from a lot of our contemporaries, that people long for venues in which they can, or places where they can have a serious dialogue about their work. Because so often it seems in a city that has maybe 1.5 reviewers who go out and look at the work that's being shown all over town, there is hardly any. You feel like sometimes you made some work, you threw a pebble out into the lake, and it just, sunk without a ripple, because there's no feedback at all. So this, creating an event like this is one way of fostering it, but I'm talking, and I should let you talk about how you feel about that.
Well, I think that it's important, and one of the reasons that I have done Open Studio is to have that feedback. I think that as an independent artist, the most important thing you can do is to create a following for yourself so that you always have somebody to give you that kind of feedback, to help you to understand whether or not you're actually achieving what you think you are in your work. It's important to put your work out there for critical review. And if you're out in the big public, you know, the public at large, there is no hiding because people are very honest about what they think. You know, if they're educated in terms of what art is or how sophisticated their art is, you know, then that's one thing. But if you're out in the general public and, you know, you got, you know, Joe and Mary from who knows where, and, you know, they don't really look at a lot of art, but they come up to you and they say, oh, what is this? And you tell them it's handmade paper, and you don't go any further than that, then you kind of introduce them to your way of thinking, because it forces them to actually look at the work through their own eyes and to come to their own conclusion. And I think that that too is very important. Interesting aside, on Thursday, there was filming at the PG County Museum because there was a CBS morning segment. And there's a guy walking around taking pictures, and I realized it's my cross the alley neighbor. You know, somebody who worked at the post office all his life, and, you know, I saw his 4 sons grow up, and so Jerry retired and he got interested in the camera and he started taking pictures, and now he's a reporter for the Washington Informer. So he was there taking pictures, and we were talking, and he called me to ask me to clarify a point, and he said this to me, is that all this time that he's lived behind me, he never really had any appreciation for what being an artist meant. Okay, but now going to the museum and seeing my work there and understanding how much, because he's seen me out there just really working, you know, my butt off, you know, week after week, year after year, but he never really understood what I was doing or why it was important. But having made the full circle now, he understands what an artist's job is.
Okay, that's nice.
And that's the important thing, is understanding that the artist is a job. You know, it's not like I'm just having fun, and that, you know, there's, you know, a salary check at the end of it. You know, and that's all that the work is about. But it's you know, a way of being, essentially.
Anything?
I know we shouldn't ask more than one, but it does. The other thing that strikes me is that there's an interesting, this is more of a question.
Mm-hmm.
So there, you know, to what extent do you rely on just chance, like when in the paper pieces, that, you know, when you're making the paper, you can't have full control about what exactly the shape is going to be. So to what extent do you, you know, just celebrate that degree of arbitrariness?
Well, I celebrate it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
No, I mean, because to me, that's the challenge, is that you start with nothing, you know, and where you go from there is really the conversation that you create between you and the materials. You know, if you're going to pay attention to what they're telling you, or are you going to force your ideas on them, which is what I felt like I did with this piece.
So do you ever find yourself completely surprised at something?
Yes, oftentimes when I end up stepping back from it, you know, it's like, okay, I've been working, and now it's time to take a break. And I go upstairs, and maybe I had some coffee, I had some lunch, and I go back downstairs, and I look at what I've done, and I say, oh my God, I did that. You know, and that's the joy of working. You know, I find the most difficult thing is actually finishing things. You know, it's like when you're preparing something so it can actually go out in public and be hung somewhere. Those are the tedious things I find, you know, putting the varnish on and, you know, figuring out how it's going to hang and all of that. That's what I wish I had studio.
I think one of the things that's happened over, you know, the number of years that I've been working, and I think you have too, that your eye gets more and more educated and more sensitive. So, you know, you're able to look at your own stuff and say, you know, I got it, or it needs this, or it needs that.
Mm-hmm.
And I know when I started, I was flailing around more. I still flail, but you learn to see
And
over time.
And I think that you also challenge yourself over time. You challenge yourself more because you become really familiar with the way that you work. And for me, I want to push myself to find new things to talk about or new ways of saying something. Because I also find that as an abstract person, there's a tendency to work with the same materials and to work with the same techniques over and over. I mean, I stitch and I sew and I weave, you know, and a lot of things. And I started doing things that were using paint to collage as opposed to making really specific collages, because I wanted to give a different texture to the work and a different way of looking at it, and understanding that doing it this way will make this happen, or doing it this way will make this happen. And even stitching these together, these pieces are stitched as opposed to being glued. Okay, it gives it a different way of hanging and a different feel to it, as if they were collage, which would make them really flat.
Yes.
I just find that abstraction gives you a certain amount of freedom that you really, you're always trying to do something precise, and then do you find that the abstraction, just working that way, do you run into a purpose? I mean, once you start doing and manipulating a piece of artwork, does it reveal something to you in terms of what it's for? Or
Well, oftentimes I start out with a selection of material. Like, I know that with the batting, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make a series of white pieces that are going to have stitches, and I don't know what else. But I know that that's where I'm going to start with it, and I think that they actually might end up being black and white. But that's where I'm starting, and starting to work on the batting itself to make it a surface that I can actually draw on is going to be the first step. So that means I'm going to be using the mediums and the varnishes so that I'll have a surface that I can actually mark on, as opposed to one that simply absorbs the paint.
Oh, you're making us really, really interested to see that.
Well, I think that if things go the way they should, then I have work scheduled to be shown at En Fleur for their East of the River show. It's going to be a 3-person show with Amber Robles-Gordon and Aisha. I can't think of this young lady's last name, but she's actually a figurative painter, which should make it a very interesting show. But that's going to be in June, and I'm hoping that this work will be ready for June. So, Any other questions, comments?
Thank you all for coming.
Yes.
You all for coming.
Thanks to
I'm
my
sure
guests.
You'll be hanging around. Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks for inviting me. I
Thank you.
really, really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Okay.
Nice crowd.
I'm happy. Yeah. Great. It's good.